And my host today is Rodney Brown. Rodney, welcome.
Well,
it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me. Looking forward to this dynamic discussion.
Absolutely. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself, who you are, why did you start consulting and training business, and how did you do that?
Yeah, it was a serendipitous route. It wasn't something that I set out to plan. I spent 30 years in corporate America in the tech industry working for Fortune 500 companies. But along the way, I always had this interest I always felt business could be a liberator in communities, a liberator in helping people get to work. And so throughout my corporate career, I saw a lot of challenges. I saw inequities. I wondered why the most talented people were being managed out the door. And I wonder why there weren't more of me in these companies. And I wonder why I wasn't advancing. So coming from a fact base and sort of a science sort of background and interest in wanting data, I decided that it would make a lot of sense to use, at that time, it was called the Quality Six Sigma Principles. And I incorporated that into innovation and cultural diversity. And so I did some work way back in 1992 that showed the connection between innovation and cultural diversity. Now that's a mainstream idea, but that's originally how I got started into this role. And it was always as I was an executive, so it wasn't like my main role, but it was something that I knew that was very important to do.
Can you mention just a little bit about the transition from being executive to being a coach and a trainer, coming in as an outsider and helping organization and leaders to change?
Yeah, that was a very challenging role. And I pause because there's so much that goes into that. For me, it wasn't something that I pursued. I had the mindset when I joined corporate America that I'm going to be a billionaire and I'm going to grow my companies. And I got a chance to really grow my technology company extremely fast and had a chance to really do that deal. But what I ended up realizing is when you start talking dollar amounts of that big, you really see people's behavior. And people do strange things when there's huge opportunities on the table. And you get challenged by your morals and your values. And I reached a point where it was an ethical decision that needed to be made. And for me, I didn't want to cross a certain line. And it was clear to me that the line, yes, it could be gray, but I didn't feel comfortable with it. So it was that point that I realized as an executive and as a person, what's really important? Maintaining truth, or going after the money and wondering about something later on and not feeling good about it. And that decision cost me my business. It cost me a marriage. It cost me a lifestyle. And so it was a very costly decision. I even had to go to a doctor and all of that to kind of get me through this because I had worked so hard coming from a background of a housing projects and having achieved a very wealthy status, and then having all that leave. And so that's number one. So after that, it was, okay, what am I going to do now? So that's when I went into a nonprofit organization to see what was going on there. And within the nonprofit organization, I've got a really good sense of the issues and the disconnect between business and nonprofit. But I also saw that the nonprofit also is an industry. And so with that, I poured back and I left the nonprofit environment because I really felt every nonprofit should be working itself out of business if it's working to really help the people of the community. So I walked away from that opportunity and thought, okay, let me go back into tech. So I started banging on tech's door, and all of a sudden, after helping these companies with gobs of money, millions, if not even billions of dollars that I contributed and helped generate, I couldn't get back in. Kept pounding. So then I came back and I thought, well, what's going on here? So that's when I did research and did research on the market, and I learned a bit about that. And the research said there's a fundamental shift that's going on in the marketplace. And I just wasn't happy with the idea that it might have been my age, it might have been my race. I knew there had to be something more than just those two things. And the fundamental shift was the role that technology is having on shifting the job markets. And with AI, artificial intelligence, a lot of jobs are being displaced, and particularly the repetitive and the cognitive jobs, and we're going to see more of that happening. So with that awakening, I thought, I need to let the world know that if we don't prepare to reinvent ourselves and learn new skills, you're going to be out of a job. And then what are we going to do with all these people? So it's not about really scaring, it's about understanding how to shift and how to reinvent yourself. So it was going through that trajectory of experiences and evolution that helped me realize, you know what I'd been through can become an asset and can help many other people.
Fantastic. A little bit of what I know about you. You work with C-suite specifically, leadership positions, to help them understand, build that awareness, learn about equity, and the importance of equity and inclusion in that effort of change and preparing for the future workforce, right?
Yes.
How do you do that in the COVID time?
Yeah, that's been difficult too. I did our first workshop a couple of days ago with a client. It was face-to-face at a conference center, and we had the appropriate social distancing and all of that. And it felt good to be back in front of people. During the COVID time, I've had to do all these Zoom conferences, so trying to get really comfortable with the Zoom technology. And it can work very effectively if you've already had relationships with people. If you're trying to establish a relationship, it's a little bit more difficult and challenging to do that. And so as a result, we've been writing a lot. Got a book that's going to be coming out probably sometime early next year. So we shifted into that mode. And so we've just been working with clients through the Zoom and doing some writing, and can't wait to get back out here because the phone is ringing literally every day with companies saying, what do we do, particularly after the George Floyd murder. I think there's been a wake-up call in not only America, but the world, to say, ooh, this is a real serious issue. We haven't been paying attention. We've been focused elsewhere. But that's how I've been dealing with the environment of COVID, is through Zoom, and now with some very measured and careful orchestrated workshops, meeting off-site, going to areas that have the space and room to make sure that it's safe, and doing the appropriate protocols, the temperatures and the masks and the wiping of the hands and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. It's important, I think, for us to continue to do this work even when those limitations are in place, because you can't postpone that type of priority until later from now, a year
absolutely.
from now. You need to continue to work on those right now. So I applaud you for adapting and making it happen. What are some challenges do you think others in the roles like yourself and myself, trainers and consultants who are doing equity work, training, and development of other people, what might you advise to them in terms of that field of racial equity and diversity and inclusion work?
Well, I remember when I sat through equity, diversity workshops, I used to grind my teeth because I always felt that they weren't bold enough, and I felt that it really didn't address the systemic issue. And that's not knocking or not saying that the practitioners weren't very well educated and very effective. It's just, I could just tell sitting around the room that the people who got it already sort of knew it, but the people who didn't, I didn't feel we were doing a good job. So the number one thing that I would tell consultants and companies and organizations, and that is, number one, do a thorough, objective, credible assessment through your own individual. Find out who you are as an individual. Find out who your blind spots are. And there are some proprietary tools out there that can help you understand, particularly in the D&I space, where your blind spots are, where your weaknesses are. And so that can be very helpful in developing yourself. Secondly, your team, needing to get feedback from your team, understanding how your team views you, and taking a look at that feedback. And then finally, an organizational assessment. And so you triangulate all of that information, and what it will do is give you a composite in terms of where you're at as an organization, as an individual, and there's individual plans that can be developed for each of that. So from a DEI program, number one, doing the assessments and good understanding there. The second thing is to do an external analysis, and that's really on the industry, the community, the politics, and the workforce that you're going to need. Third, you need to do a cross-current DEI historical analysis. This went over very, very huge with the C-suite the other day. And what we did is we laid out a 401-year journey. And one of the things that it made very clear, you can't talk about race and gender without including technology, the labor unions, and most importantly, wealth and class. And so we had those currents, and we had all of the timetables. And once you look at DEI and its roots, and you see the timetables and the dates all the way from the 14th century, the 16th century, to the 1800s, to the emancipation, and you follow that to the assassination of Lincoln, and you look at all of that, and you look at the inventions, you look at the time when the unions first got started, you look at the time when the Klan got started, you look at what's happening with wealth and class, and you sit back and say, oh, now I get it. And then finally, the fourth thing is we need to stop tolerating racist behavior at home, in public, in our churches, wherever it is. We need to take a stand. And we need to bring people in. We don't need to bombard them, but we need to say, that's not correct. Or where are you getting your information? Why are you responding that way to that? And then finally, we need to remain civil. And as I say, civility is a lubricant of a civilized society. And that doesn't mean that you don't go out and protest. It doesn't mean that things won't get broken occasionally. But it means that we got to come back to being civil, because that is the lubricant, right, of a civilized society. And so that's what I would tell them.
Yeah, it sounds like you're modeling that very well.
Well, I'm trying.
By your presence and by your just stance and ethics that you embodied.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two key lessons from your journey so far. You've had quite a rough experience with transitioning out of corporate and then finding yourself again. I'm sure there were some moments of despair and some moments of happiness along the way.
Well, I'm born under the sign of stubbornness as a Taurus, right? So, yeah. But the key thing there is perseverance. You've got to have that. And I say the second thing is never forgetting who you are and what your talents are. And so it's really important to look at your body of work, look at the influences that you've had, and to realize that everything that you've gone through, it's not personal. And realize that there is a better way, that the universe is trying to tell you something, that perhaps those jobs, those things that I walked away, perhaps that was what was needed to get me to what I really enjoy doing now, and that's impacting and opening up the doors and trying to make the world a little bit more humane and sane, and call out injustices and inequities where they exist, but doing it in a way that they did in the great debate of 1965 with James Baldwin and William F. Buckley. So I think we have to have that level of knowledge and discourse so that we can raise the intelligentsia of all the people in our society so that we can make better decisions. So that would be my recommendation, is we got to have people at the table, even people that we don't agree with. And we have to have the maturity to really use credibility, resources, talents, data, and really have a standard of truth that we all can aspire to and agree on and move towards that direction. Right now, that's not where we're at. And if we keep going the way we're going now, it really threatens the foundation of what we have appreciated and come to love about our country, and that is being a unique place where everyone has an opportunity to achieve their dream.